I'll give you $100,000 if you serve me in Japanese. Victoria Hartwell's voice cut through the elegant murmur of Luminance, Miami's most expensive restaurant, like a knife through silk. Green $100 bills fell onto Naomi's silver tray, one after another, creating a grotesque spectacle that instantly silenced all the surrounding conversations. Naomi Carter, 32, held the tray with hands that didn't tremble, even when the 10th bill fell on top of the others. $10,000, right in front of her. More than she earned in 3 months, serving $1,000 bottles of champagne to people who didn't even look at her face when they placed their orders. What's the problem? Victoria leaned back in her blue velvet chair, a cruel smile curving her blood-red lipstick-covered lips. 10,000 isn't enough? Fine, she made a dramatic gesture, pulling more bills from her Hermes bag. 20,000. 30. 40. The bills kept falling, and with each one, the public humiliation intensified. Customers at neighboring tables abandoned any pretense of not paying attention. Everyone watched, some with visible discomfort, others with morbid curiosity. Victoria Hartwell, 48, CEO of Hartwell Luxury Brands, wasn't just rich, she was obscenely rich. Her $3.2 billion fortune had been built on an empire of luxury brands she had inherited from her father and ruthlessly expanded. And she loved to use that power to remind people of their place in the social hierarchy. 100,000, Victoria finally announced, the last bill landing on the absurd pile on top of the tray. She gestured to the 4 Japanese businessmen sitting at her table, all visibly uncomfortable. My business associates from Tanaka Corporation are here to discuss a $200 million partnership. Show them that American women can also be cosmopolitan. The way she said American women with that condescending tone, that smile that didn't reach her eyes, made it absolutely clear that she wasn't talking about nationality. She was talking about race. Naomi looked at the money. $100,000. It was more than the credit card debt she had accumulated paying for her father's chemotherapy sessions before he passed away 6 months ago. It was enough to finally pay off the last remnants of that hospital bill that haunted her credit like a shadow. But she knew it wasn't about money. It never was. It was about Victoria Hartwell proving to her Japanese associates that she had absolute power. That she could make a black waitress dance like a puppet just because she could. That in this world, money bought not only service, but human dignity. And when you fail, Victoria continued, her voice taking on that tone of a cruel teacher speaking to a particularly stupid student, you will kneel right here, in front of everyone, and apologize for wasting our time. Because, she laughed, a high-pitched, unpleasant sound, I bet my yacht you don't even know how to say thank you in Japanese. Hiroshi Tanaka, the oldest executive at the table, approximately 60 years old with impeccably combed gray hair, frowned. Ms. Hartwell, perhaps this isn't. Hiroshi, Victoria cut him off with a false sweetness that did little to disguise the underlying threat. Do you want to do business with me or not? Because I need to know if my partners appreciate the way I run my company. Direct. No sentimentality. The other 3 executives, Kenji Yamamoto, Yuki Sato, and the only woman in the group, Akiko Nakamura, exchanged uncomfortable glances. But none of them spoke. $200 million at stake tended to silence consciences. Naomi took a deep breath. Her hands clenched the tray until her knuckles turned white beneath her brown skin. For a moment, she was back in that hospital room, holding her father's hand as he took his last breath. Promise me you'll finish, he had whispered, his voice weak but firm. Your PhD. All that research. Don't let anything stop you, baby girl. She had promised. But promises didn't pay funeral bills. Promises didn't cover the $180,000 in medical debt that insurance refused to cover. Promises didn't put food on the table while she worked 2 shifts, waitressing at night and tutoring online during the day, trying to survive while her doctoral thesis in applied linguistics gathered dust. I accept, Naomi said, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. Victoria's smile faltered. Only for a fraction of a second, but Naomi saw it. She had expected pleas, maybe tears. Not this calm, controlled acceptance. Accept what exactly? Victoria pressed, wanting to clarify every detail of the humiliation. I accept your challenge, Ms. Hartwell. I will serve you in Japanese. And when I'm done, you will pay me the $100,000 right here, in front of everyone. As Victoria prepared her next cruel response, Her eyes scanning Naomi from head to toe with calculated disdain, something flashed across Akiko Nakamura's face, a flash of recognition, of intense curiosity. She leaned forward slightly, studying Naomi with an attention that went beyond casual observation. But Victoria didn't notice. She was too busy constructing her spectacle of cruelty. Perfect, she clapped her hands slowly, the sound echoing through the silent restaurant like gunshots. Then let's establish the rules. Not just single words, dear. I want a complete presentation of the menu. Detailed descriptions of each dish. Informal Japanese, the kind used at business dinners. None of that anime Japanese you learned on the internet. Hiroshi tried again. That's necessary, Victoria cut him off, her tone turning steely. Hiroshi, you said you value cultural authenticity. Well, let's test how authentic this situation can be. Naomi placed the tray on a nearby empty table, her hands moving with deliberate precision. Every movement was controlled, measured. There was no nervous tremor, no hesitation of someone about to fail spectacularly. There was only the dangerous calm of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do. May I choose the dishes? Naomi asked, her voice neutral as still water. Please, Victoria gestured generously, like a queen granting a favor to a peasant. Choose the easiest ones if you want. You're going to fail anyway. What Victoria Hartwell didn't know, what would have been impossible for her to guess by looking at that waitress in a black uniform and white apron, was that Naomi Carter had spent 18 months in Tokyo as a visiting researcher at Waseda University. That her unfinished doctoral dissertation was on intercultural pragmatics in Japanese-American business contexts. That she had presented papers at academic conferences in Kyoto, Osaka, and Sapporo. That she was fluent not only in colloquial Japanese, but in Kigo, the complex system of Japanese honorific language that took years to master completely. And she definitely didn't know that Akiko Nakamura, sitting quietly at the table, was a visiting professor of language studies at the University of Tokyo, a specialist in second language acquisition, and had served on academic review committees where Naomi had presented her research 2 years earlier. If you're enjoying this story about what happens when billionaire arrogance meets underestimated competence, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how $100,000 would become the most expensive purchase Victoria Hartwell would ever make. Victoria leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with studied elegance. Before we begin this entertainment, let's make the consequences very clear. Her voice had that tone of someone who was used to dictating terms, never negotiating them. When you fail, and you will fail, I don't just want an apology. She paused dramatically, ensuring that everyone in the restaurant was listening. You will admit, out loud, that you tried to deceive everyone by pretending to have knowledge you don't possess. You will acknowledge that you are just an uneducated waitress who watched a few videos online and thought that made you special. Kenji Yamamoto, an executive in his mid-40s with thin-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Ms. Hartwell, that seems excessive. Excessive would be me allowing someone to waste your time with fraud, Victoria interrupted him. Hiroshi, you yourself said that your company values integrity above all else. Well, I'm demonstrating exactly that. I don't tolerate lies. Naomi watched everything with a carefully neutral expression. But inside, memories flooded her mind like a broken dam. She was back in that conference room in Osaka 3 years ago, presenting her research on variations of Kigo in corporate contexts to an audience of 150 Japanese academics. Miss Carter, Professor Tanaka had said after her 45-minute presentation, delivered entirely in formal Japanese, your command of Sankigo and Kenjugo is extraordinary for a non-native speaker. How long have you been studying? 7 intensive years, sensei, she had replied in Japanese, using the appropriate level of linguistic humility. But I still have much to learn. The room had erupted in applause. Not the false praise that foreigners sometimes received, but genuine recognition of technical excellence. I also want to make it clear, Victoria continued, her voice bringing Naomi back to the present, that you are doing this voluntarily. No one is forcing you. You can quit right now, pick up your little tray, and go back to waiting tables as you always have. It was a classic verbal trap, and everyone in the room recognized it. If Naomi accepted, Victoria could say she had chosen to be humiliated. If she refused, she would appear cowardly, unable to stand by her own word. I understand the terms perfectly, Naomi replied calmly. But I would like to add one condition. The silence that followed was absolute. No one negotiated with Victoria Hartwell. It was simply not done. You want to add a condition? Victoria repeated slowly, as if the words were too absurd to process. You, a waitress, want to negotiate with me? It's not negotiation, Naomi clarified, her voice maintaining that unsettling calm that was beginning to irritate Victoria. It's just fair. If I can not only serve in Japanese, but also explain the appropriate cultural etiquette for each dish, demonstrate an understanding of Kigo and business vocabulary, you double the bet to 200,000. The entire restaurant seemed to collectively gasp. Akiko Nakamura covered her mouth with her hand, but not quickly enough to hide the smile forming there. Victoria stood up so abruptly that her chair creaked. Are you crazy? $200,000. But, Naomi continued as if Victoria hadn't spoken, if I fail in any technical aspect, incorrect pronunciation, inappropriate use of honorifics, cultural error, I work for free in this restaurant for 6 months. No salary. Just tips. Yuki Sato, the youngest executive, approximately 35 years old, let out a low whistle. That's a serious bet. Victoria studied Naomi with narrowed eyes. Something didn't add up. The confidence was too genuine. But she had built an empire by trusting her instincts about people, and every fiber of her being told her that a black waitress from a Miami restaurant couldn't possibly have the kind of linguistic education necessary for what she was proposing. Very well, Victoria finally said, sitting back down. 200,000 if you impress me. 6 months of slave labor if you fail. And since you want to be so bold, I'll choose the dishes. The most difficult ones on the menu. She motioned to the sommelier, a middle-aged Frenchman named Pierre. Bring the full omakase menu. Chef Nakamura's special. Pierre hesitated. Madam, that menu has 12 courses with extremely technical descriptions. Even our trained servers. I didn't ask for your opinion, Pierre. Bring the menu. As Pierre hurried away, Hiroshi leaned toward Victoria. Nakamura is one of the most respected chefs in Japan. His menu uses terminology that even native Japanese find challenging. That's cruel. That, Victoria corrected, is what she asked for. You want to play high stakes? I'll show you what high stakes really means. Naomi remained motionless, but her eyes briefly met Akiko's. And in that moment, a flash of recognition passed between them. Akiko knew. She knew exactly who Naomi was. What Victoria couldn't see, what her arrogance completely blinded her to, was that Chef Nakamura, whose menu she had specifically chosen to ensure Naomi's failure, was the same chef who had been a culinary consultant for Naomi's research on gastronomic terminology in Japanese business contexts. Naomi had spent countless hours in his kitchen in Tokyo, learning not only the names of the dishes, but the philosophy behind each preparation, the regional subtleties, the historical contexts. She had written 40 pages of her dissertation specifically on how culinary language reflected Japanese social and corporate hierarchies. Pierre returned with a black leather-bound menu, placing it carefully in front of Victoria. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages with growing satisfaction. Perfect, she murmured. Absolutely perfect. She turned the menu so Naomi could see it. 12 dishes. Each with cultural history, specific preparation techniques, and appropriate etiquette for consumption. Informal business Japanese, please. Naomi stepped forward, looking at the menu. Her eyes quickly scanned the pages, and something subtly changed in her posture. Not nervousness, recognition. She knew every one of those dishes. Some she had even helped develop the descriptive language for during her research. May I begin? She asked simply. Please, Victoria gestured with feigned generosity. Impress us. If you can. Naomi turned to face the table of Japanese executives. Akiko was sitting completely upright now, her eyes shining with what looked like anticipation. And then, Naomi began to speak. The first words that came out of her mouth were in Japanese so perfect, so formally correct, that Hiroshi Tanaka dropped the napkin he was holding. It wasn't just fluency, it was the kind of Japanese that took years of intensive study and deep cultural immersion to develop. Minasama konbanwa, she began, using the exact level of formality appropriate for a high-level business dinner. Kyo wa totemo koi na omakase menu o go shoukai sasite itadakimasu. Yuki muttered something incredulous to Kenji, who just shook his head in silent shock. Victoria frowned. What did she say? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to have the honor of introducing today's omakase menu, Hiroshi translated automatically, his voice carrying barely concealed surprise. Her kigo is perfect. Kigo. Victoria repeated. Japanese honorific language, Akiko explained, speaking for the first time, her voice soft but laden with meaning. There are 3 levels, Sankigo to elevate the listener, Kenjugo to humble oneself, and Tainaigo to be polite. She just used all 3 in a single sentence, perfectly calibrated for the context. That's not something you learn by watching videos online. Victoria felt the first tremor of uncertainty, but her pride was too great to back down. She memorized a sentence. Continue, she ordered Naomi. And Naomi continued. She described the first dish, otoro sashimi, in detail that went far beyond simple translation. She explained in formal Japanese the difference between otoro, chutoro, and akami, the parts of the tuna corresponding to the levels of fat marbling. She described the ikejime technique used to preserve the quality of the meat. She mentioned the seasonal importance and tradition of auctions at the Tsukiji market. Every word was technically perfect. Every use of honorifics was appropriate. And most importantly, she included cultural nuances that demonstrated deep understanding, not superficial memorization. Kenji was whispering translations to Victoria, his voice growing progressively more impressed. She's explaining how the angle of the knife affects the texture on the tongue. How proper preparation shows respect for the fish and the fisherman. That's chef-level knowledge. Victoria felt sweat begin to form on her perfectly made-up forehead. This wasn't going as planned. It wasn't possible. It just wasn't possible for a waitress to have this level of knowledge. Wait, she interrupted. How do we know you're not just saying random words? Making things up. Akiko turned slowly to Victoria, and for the first time that evening, there was coldness in her eyes. Because I am a professor of linguistics at the University of Tokyo, Ms. Hartwell. And everything she has said so far is not only correct, but demonstrates an understanding of subtleties that take years to master. The restaurant fell completely silent. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to find the words. And Naomi, seeing the realization begin to dawn on Victoria's face, allowed the slightest of smiles to touch her lips before continuing on to the second course. Naomi continued on to the second course, her voice flowing in Japanese with the same ease as someone breathing. Tsugi wa, Hokkaido yuni no gunkanmaki desu. Kono yuni wa, Tokuni rishiri to kara chokasetsu toriosita monoda. Victoria grabbed Kenji's arm. What is she saying now? She's explaining, Kenji translated, barely able to hide the admiration in his voice, that the sea urchin comes specifically from the island of Rishiri in Hokkaido. She's describing why that region produces the creamiest uni due to the cold currents of the Sea of Okhotsk. She's even mentioning the ideal harvest season. Hiroshi leaned forward, completely absorbed. He asked a question in rapid Japanese, testing her. Naomi answered without hesitation, her response incorporating not only technical vocabulary but also the appropriate grammatical structure of Kenjugo, the humble form of Japanese used when speaking to superiors. Sasuga desu ni, Hiroshi murmured, shaking his head in admiration. Kanojo no nihongo wa honto ni subarashii. Victoria didn't need translation to understand that she was losing control of the situation. This is a trick. You planned this. She's an actress you hired to make me look stupid. Akiko let out a short, humorless laugh. Ms. Hartwell, I've never seen this woman before in my life. But, she paused, studying Naomi more closely, there is something familiar about her presentation style. Naomi met Akiko's eyes for just a second. A flash of recognition passed between them, but Naomi shook her head almost imperceptibly. Not yet. Continue, Victoria ordered through clenched teeth, her face beginning to redden. All 12 dishes. Let's see how long you can keep up this charade. What Victoria didn't understand was that every dish she forced Naomi to describe only dug the hole she was falling into deeper. Because Naomi wasn't reciting memorized descriptions. She was sharing knowledge acquired through 18 months of immersive research that had cost her mental health, her savings, and almost her academic dream. Third course, Kobe A5 Wagyu. Naomi didn't just describe the meat, she explained the grading system, the specific genetics of the Taijima breed, the beer diet and massages, a myth, she clarified in Japanese, and the difference between authentic Kobe and commercial imitations. Fourth course, chawanmushi with matsutake. She detailed the rarity of the matsutake mushroom, its distinctive pine aroma, the delicate steaming technique required for the silky perfection of the egg, and crucially, the proper etiquette of using the specific spoon provided, never chopsticks. With each course, Victoria's confidence visibly deteriorated. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Her flawless makeup began to show small cracks of sweat. She picked up her wine glass and took a deep drink, something she never did at business meetings. Yuki whispered something to Hiroshi, who nodded gravely and then turned to Victoria. "Ms. Hartwell, we need to discuss something in private." "No," Victoria cut in, her voice rising an octave. "Not until this is over." She may have memorized some descriptions from the internet, but I guarantee she'll slip up. She'll make a mistake. But the mistakes didn't come. Fifth course, fugu sashimi, pufferfish prepared by a licensed chef. Naomi described the strict government licenses required, the years of training to remove the poisonous glands, the distinctive translucent texture when cut correctly, and the slight numbness on the tongue that was considered desirable. Sixth course, seasonal vegetable tempura. She not only named each vegetable in Japanese, kabocha shishito renkon, but explained the philosophy of tempura as an art form, where the batter must be light as a cloud, the oil kept at a precise temperature of 180 degrees Celsius, and each piece eaten immediately to preserve the contrast between crispy exterior and juicy interior. "Stop," Victoria said suddenly, her voice cracking. "Just stop for a second." Naomi paused, waiting calmly. Victoria turned to Akiko. "You, professor of linguistics or whatever, can you actually verify that what she's saying is correct? Technically? Because anyone can say words in Japanese. How do we know she's not just making up things that sound convincing?" Akiko placed her chopsticks on the rest with deliberate precision. "Ms. Hartwell, I am an expert in cross-cultural pragmatics and second language acquisition. I have published 3 books on Kigo and Japanese business speech. I can assure you that what this young woman is demonstrating goes far beyond ordinary fluency." She paused, allowing the words to sink in. In fact, her command of specialized vocabulary, appropriate use of honorific particles, and knowledge of cultural nuances is at a level I rarely see even in my doctoral students. Victoria turned pale. "That's impossible. She's a waitress." "A waitress." "And I," Akiko replied softly but with steel in her voice, "am the daughter of a fisherman from Hokkaido who became a full professor at one of Japan's most prestigious universities. Never assume you know someone's story based on how they currently earn their living." The restaurant was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving, all watching the drama unfold. Pierre, the sommelier, approached Naomi discreetly. "Mademoiselle," he whispered in English, "Chef Nakamura just came out of the kitchen. He heard you talking. He would like to know. He asks permission to ask if you are who he thinks you are." Naomi turned slightly, and there he was. Chef Takashi Nakamura, 58, a culinary legend who had earned 3 Michelin stars in Tokyo before opening his American restaurant. His eyes were wide with shocked recognition. "Carter-san?" he asked in hesitant Japanese. "Naomi Carter-san? From the research in Tokyo." The entire restaurant seemed to lean forward collectively. Naomi met his eyes and nodded slowly. "Hi, Nakamura-sensei. Hisashiburi desu." The chef pressed his hands together in deep respect. "Anata no ranbun wa subarashikata. Watashi wa mada sor o tsukataimasu." "Your article was magnificent. I still use your findings." Victoria stood up so abruptly that her chair nearly tipped over. "What's going on? Who the hell are you really?" Naomi slowly turned to face her. And for the first time that night, she allowed all barriers to fall. The humble waitress disappeared, replaced by the scholar she truly was. "My name is Naomi Catherine Carter," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am a PhD candidate in applied linguistics at the University of Florida, specializing in Japanese-American intercultural pragmatics. I spent 18 months as a visiting researcher at Waseda University in Tokyo, where I conducted field research on business language and culinary terminology." The silence was so deep that you could hear people breathing. "I have presented papers at academic conferences in Kyoto, Osaka, and Sapporo. I have worked as a linguistic consultant for 3 multinational corporations. And yes, she looked directly at Victoria. I collaborated directly with Chef Nakamura on the part of my dissertation about how gastronomic vocabulary reflects Japanese corporate hierarchies. Hiroshi covered his mouth with his hand, but he couldn't hide the smile that formed there. Then why, Victoria asked, her voice coming out like a desperate quack, are you working as a waitress? The question hung in the air like poison. Naomi took a deep breath. Because 3 years ago, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Insurance refused to cover experimental treatment. I sold everything I had. I put my doctoral program on hold to care for him during chemotherapy. When he died 6 months ago, he left me with $180,000 in medical debt and no academic position to return to. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice didn't break. So yes, Mrs. Hartwell, I am a waitress. Because people with PhDs need to eat too. They need to pay bills too. They have families they love more than their careers too. Victoria sank back into her chair, all the air seeming to have been sucked out of her lungs. Akiko stood up. Carter-san, you presented at the International Symposium on Pragmatics in Osaka 2 years ago, didn't you? About modal particles in business contexts. Yes, Professor, Naomi replied in formal Japanese. Your work was brilliant. I quoted it in my latest book. Akiko turned to Victoria, her expression icy. This woman you tried to publicly humiliate is one of the most brilliant minds in applied linguistics I've encountered in years. And you treated her like trash because you assumed that waitress clothes meant an empty mind. Yuki clapped her hands slowly. Ms. Hartwell, I think you owe us $200,000. She hasn't finished all the dishes yet, Victoria protested weakly. No need, Hiroshi said, his voice carrying final authority. We've seen more than enough. Pay her. Victoria looked around the table, seeking support, but found only cold, judgmental stares. Her fingers trembled as she opened her purse. And as she counted out bills with hands that couldn't stop shaking, everyone in the restaurant understood that they were witnessing something much greater than a simple bet won. They were seeing the exact moment when arrogance met consequence, when prejudice faced competence, and when someone who had lost almost everything discovered that she still had the power to reclaim her dignity. Victoria's hands trembled visibly as she counted the $100 bills. Each bill placed on the table seemed to tear a piece of her soul away. 50,000. 100,000. 150,000. Wait, she said suddenly, stopping at 160,000. Her face was red, veins bulging in her neck. I didn't agree to this. The original deal was 100,000. You're the one who got arrogant and doubled the bet. Naomi tilted her head slightly. True. And you accepted the terms. In front of everyone. Her voice was calm as still water, but there was steel beneath it. I was clearly joking, Victoria insisted, looking desperately at the Japanese executives. You know I was joking, right? No one really expected her to. Ms. Hartwell, Hiroshi interrupted, his voice sharp as broken glass. In Japan, we have a concept called mensaku. Saving face. You just completely lost yours. Don't make it worse by trying to go back on your word. Hiroshi, you don't understand, Victoria pleaded, all her composure crumbling. This was a trap. She planned this. She came to work here specifically to make me look like an idiot. Akiko let out a humorless laugh. You think a PhD candidate with 18 months of research in Tokyo got a job as a waitress here hoping that you, specifically, would show up and publicly challenge her? Your paranoia is as great as your arrogance. That's when the first twist no one expected happened. Pierre, the sommelier, cleared his throat. Excuse me, but I have something to say. All eyes turned to him. He was holding his cell phone, the screen showing a paused video. I recorded everything, he announced, his voice trembling slightly. From the moment Ms. Hartwell started throwing money on the tray. Every cruel word. Every moment of humiliation she tried to inflict. He paused, looking directly at Victoria. I was recording because this isn't the first time. She does this regularly. With waiters, with employees, with anyone she considers beneath her. Victoria turned pale as paper. You can't, you're not allowed to record customers without. Actually, Pierre continued, Florida is a one-party consent state. I can legally record conversations I'm a part of. And as the sommelier serving this table, I was part of this conversation. Yuki took out his own cell phone. And I recorded it too. Because when I saw where this was going, I thought it might be useful to have documentation. He looked at Victoria with pure contempt. For future labor lawsuits from employees you've abused. Victoria's face went from pale to sickly gray. You can't release this. I have lawyers. I have. $3 billion, Kenji finished. Yes, we know. You mentioned your fortune 7 times during dinner. But you know what you don't have? Basic decency. That's when the second twist occurred. Akiko slowly rose, walking over to stand beside Naomi. Carter-san, may I ask you a personal question? Hi, Sensei. Your dissertation focused on cross-cultural communication in Japanese-American corporate mergers, correct? That's right. Akiko turned to the executives. Gentlemen, do you know why we are here today? It's not just to have dinner with Ms. Hartwell. She paused dramatically. Our corporation is considering acquiring a majority stake in Hartwell luxury brands. Part of our due diligence was to assess whether the company's values aligned with ours. Victoria stood up so abruptly that she knocked over her wine glass. You're thinking of buying my company? We were, Hiroshi corrected, the verb tense making all the difference. But tonight has revealed exactly the kind of toxic leadership that would cause a public relations disaster in Japan. Abusive treatment of employees. Blatant racial discrimination. Cultural arrogance. No, Victoria began to panic in earnest now. That was a misunderstanding. I didn't know she was educated. If I had known. Exactly the problem, Kenji interrupted coldly. If you had known she was a PhD, you would have treated her with respect. But because you assumed she was just a waitress, you felt free to humiliate her. That tells us everything about your values. Akiko continued, her voice clinical now. Carter-san, our corporation is opening a cross-cultural relations division. We need a director who understands the nuances of American-Japanese business. The starting salary would be $190,000 annually, plus full benefits. She paused. Would you be interested? The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. Naomi blinked, processing the words she had just heard. Are you offering me a job? Hi. Your knowledge demonstrated tonight, combined with your published research, makes you the ideal candidate. Akiko smiled genuinely for the first time. And unlike some people, we value competence over appearances. Victoria was hyperventilating now. Hiroshi, please. Can we discuss this in private? This acquisition took months to negotiate. You can't cancel it because of one bad dinner. One bad dinner, Hiroshi repeated slowly. Ms. Hartwell, you systematically attempted to destroy another person's dignity for entertainment. And you based that cruelty entirely on racist assumptions about intellectual ability. He stood up, the other executives following his lead. Tanaka Corporation has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. We will not associate our brand with yours. How much? Victoria asked desperately. How much to make you forget this ever happened? 5 million? 10? I can write a check right now. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Do you really think, Yuki said slowly, that you can buy your way out of public displays of racism? That everything has a price. Victoria looked around the restaurant, searching for any friendly faces. She found only judgmental and contemptuous stares. Customers who had once smiled at her, who had competed for her attention at social events, now stared at her like she was a toxic stranger. That's when her cell phone started ringing. And ringing. And ringing. She looked at the screen and paled even more. Her personal assistant. Her PR director. Her chief lawyer. The chairman of her board. All calling simultaneously. With trembling hands, she answered the call from the public relations director. What? Her voice died as she heard what was being said on the other end. Everyone in the restaurant could see her expression go from confusion to horror to utter panic. What do you mean it's already online? She whispered. This just happened 20 minutes ago. Pierre raised his phone again. I have a live stream on my Instagram. 15,000 followers. The video has already been shared 3,000 times. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, the phone falling limply from her hand. No. No, no, no. Naomi watched everything with conflicting emotions. Part of her felt satisfaction at seeing justice being done. But another part, the part that had been raised by a father who taught compassion even in the face of cruelty, felt something close to pity. Ms. Hartwell, she said calmly. Victoria looked up, her eyes filled with tears. You offered me $100,000 assuming I would fail. You promised $200 when I raised the stakes. Now you owe me that money, not because I earn it by destroying you, but because it was a deal you yourself proposed. Naomi picked up the bills Victoria had stopped counting, completing the amount herself. $200,000. More money than she had ever seen in her entire life. This money will pay my father's medical bills. It will allow me to finish my doctorate without working 3 jobs. It will give me the chance to honor his memory by completing what I promised. Her voice broke slightly. So thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. Not for your prejudice, but for finally facing consequences that may teach you that human dignity is priceless. Victoria covered her face with her hands, sobs shaking her shoulders. Chef Nakamura approached the table, holding a small wrapped box. Carter-san, when you were in Tokyo, you helped me understand how my menu language could unintentionally alienate non-Japanese customers. I changed everything based on your research. My restaurant's revenue grew by 40%. He held out the box. This is a traditional thank you gift that I should have given you long ago. 1,000 apologies for the delay. Inside was a set of handmade chopsticks made of ebony, inlaid with silver. The kind of gift one gives only to people of the highest respect. Sensei, Naomi whispered in Japanese, tears finally escaping. This is too much. It is never too much to honor excellence, he replied in Japanese. Hiroshi placed his hand on Naomi's shoulder. Carter-san, accept Professor Nakamura's job offer. But more importantly, finish your doctorate. The world needs people like you in positions of influence. That's when the restaurant manager nervously approached Victoria. Ms. Hartwell, I'm sorry to inform you, but we have received instructions from the owner. Your account is permanently closed. You are no longer welcome at this establishment. Victoria stared at him with glazed eyes. James has known my husband for 20 years. Yes. And he also watched the live broadcast. He sent a personal message saying that Luminance's values do not align with your behavior. Victoria's phone rang again. This time it was her husband. She didn't even answer it. She just watched the name flash on the screen until the call went to voicemail. Akiko gently touched Naomi's arm. Let's go. You don't need to be here to watch this. But before they left, Naomi turned around one last time. Ms. Hartwell, you asked me why a waitress knew Japanese. The real question is, why couldn't a billionaire recognize competence when it was right in front of her? And with that, Naomi Carter walked out of Luminance for the last time as a waitress, and into the rest of her life as the woman who proved that true knowledge always finds a way to reveal itself, especially when tested by those who confuse privilege with superiority. 18 months later, Naomi Carter adjusted her navy blue blazer as she entered the main auditorium at the University of Florida. 200 people filled the seats, professors, doctoral students, visiting researchers from 3 continents. All there for her dissertation defense. Dr. Carter, the committee chair, greeted her, using her title in advance as an academic courtesy. Are you ready? She smiled, touching the ebony chopsticks she now wore as a hair clip. Completely. Her 2-hour presentation was flawless. Years of research condensed into brilliant analysis of how language shapes, and is shaped by power dynamics in intercultural contexts. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. The committee's vote was unanimous. Dr. Naomi Catherine Carter. Finally. Victoria Hartwell was not so lucky. The video from that night at Luminance went viral with devastating speed. 50 million views in a week. Hashtag Hartwell racism and hashtag karma served trending globally. Her company lost contracts with 6 major international retailers in 72 hours. The board voted to remove her as CEO in an emergency meeting. Her husband, tired of decades of abusive behavior finally exposed publicly, filed for divorce and half of the assets. 3 of her senior executives sued for hostile work environment, their own videos of abuse emerging as evidence. Hartwell Luxury Brands filed for bankruptcy 6 months after that night, sold at auction for a fraction of its previous value. Victoria now lived in a modest apartment in Coral Gables, working as a freelance consultant for small businesses that didn't know, or care about, her history. Her high society friends evaporated. Invitations to galas stopped coming. Her name became synonymous with warnings about the consequences of discrimination. One afternoon, she saw Naomi being interviewed on CNN about her new book, Linguistic Bridges: How Communication Transcends Prejudice. The irony cut like a knife. Naomi thrived in ways Victoria could never have imagined. As Director of Intercultural Relations at Tanaka Corporation Americas, she earned $220,000 a year, a salary increase after an exceptional year. She traveled between Tokyo, Sao Paulo, and New York, training executives in cultural competence. Chef Nakamura opened a second restaurant, with Naomi as his official language consultant. Each menu carried a small note, terminology developed with research by Dr. Naomi Carter. But the sweetest revenge came when Naomi was invited to speak at Harvard Business School. The case study? The Cost of Prejudice: How Victoria Hartwell Lost a $3 billion Empire in One Night. Pierre the Sommelier used her viral video to launch a YouTube channel exposing discrimination in luxury hospitality. 500,000 subscribers. 3 book offers. A documentary series in development. 2 years after that night, Naomi returned to Luminance, not as a waitress, but as a guest speaker for Tanaka's corporate event. Chef Nakamura insisted that she be given a special tribute. As she crossed the restaurant in her designer dress, a gift from Akiko, she passed the service station where she used to carry trays. A young Latina waitress, maybe 22, stared at her wide-eyed. "You're her," the waitress whispered. "The one from the video." Naomi smiled kindly. "Guilty. I'm in college. Engineering. I work here at night to pay for it." The young woman hesitated. "Sometimes customers treat me like I'm stupid. Like carrying plates means I can't calculate integrals." Naomi touched her shoulder. "Work clothes don't define brainpower. Always remember, they see the uniform. You know who you really are." The waitress nodded, tears in her eyes, and returned to work with slightly straighter posture. On stage, Naomi addressed 300 corporate executives. "Prejudice isn't just morally wrong," she said, her voice clear and confident. "It's economically stupid. When we underestimate people based on appearances, we lose talent. We lose perspective. We lose competitive advantage." She clicked to the next slide, a photo from that night, Victoria throwing money at her tray. This woman assumed incompetence based on race and occupation. It cost her literally everything. But the lesson isn't about her. It's about systems that allow Victorias to exist. The audience was absolutely silent. How many of you have discarded resumes because of names that sounded different? How many have assumed that a foreign accent means lower intelligence? How many have looked at a service worker and never imagined they could have a PhD? Discomfort rippled through the room. Good. Discomfort meant awareness. Real change, Naomi concluded, begins when we recognize that every person carries a complete story. And our inability to see that story says more about our limitations than about their value. Standing ovation. 3 full minutes. Later, during the reception, Hiroshi approached her. "Carter-san, I have a proposal. We want to expand your department. Double the team. You would lead global operations." "Salary?" she asked, smiling. $350,000. Plus equity. She thought of her father, how proud he would be. She thought of the young waitress with dreams of engineering. She thought of all the people who had been underestimated, dismissed, ignored. "I accept. But on one condition." "What is it?" "We create a scholarship program for hospitality employees who want to continue their education. We cover the full costs. No restrictions on race, nationality, or field of study." Hiroshi held out his hand. "It's a deal." Meanwhile, in a small apartment across town, Victoria watched coverage of the event on her used laptop. She saw Naomi accept the award. She saw the crowd applauding. She saw everything she herself had missed out on. Her therapist had said that regret was useless without a change in behavior. Victoria was trying. She volunteered at a community center. She went to therapy 3 times a week. But she knew she would never get back what she had lost. Nor should she. Consequences were brutal but necessary teachers. The last scene of that night at Luminance never left her mind, Naomi walking out with her dignity intact while Victoria crumbled. The waitress had won not with anger or revenge, but simply by being exactly who she always was. Excellent. Polite. Unshakable. Naomi ended that gala night on the terrace of Luminance, looking out over the lights of Miami below. Pierre joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. To justice, he toasted. To knowledge, she corrected. Because in the end, Victoria didn't lose to me. She lost to her own ignorance. 3 years since that night. 3 years proving that the best revenge was never to destroy enemies, but to build a life so meaningful that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. Naomi learned that diplomas gather dust, but applied knowledge changes worlds. That work clothes do not diminish human value. That every no can become fuel for watch this. And most importantly, that when someone tries to diminish you, the most powerful response is not anger. It is simply proving, with unshakable calm, exactly who you always knew you were. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories proving that greatness is not measured by bank account or skin color, but by the strength to never accept being less than extraordinary, even when the whole world insists you should.